Naomi Carter stepped into an upscale restaurant right in the heart of the city, dressed in nothing more than simple, unfussy clothes, as if she'd just come straight from one of her busiest workdays. She picked a secluded table in the corner, hoping for some peace and to avoid drawing attention under the glittering crystal chandeliers that lit up the room. But before Naomi could even place her order, a server approached her, her gaze cold and laden with disdain, carrying that familiar air of arrogance. "You sure you can afford to eat here?" she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm, loud enough that a few nearby patrons turned to stare, and a couple of them couldn't help but chuckle. What happened next not only left everyone in the restaurant stunned, but also revealed a truth capable of overturning long-held prejudices. The revolving door softly squeaked as Naomi Carter entered. She was a black woman in her 40s, her posture elegant, her natural curls bouncing softly around her shoulders, dressed plainly in a crisp white blouse, black slacks, and low-heeled shoes. No makeup, no flashy jewelry, no hint of an expensive perfume. Just the calm confidence of a woman accustomed to standing alone against the wind. Yet the moment Naomi crossed the threshold, a hush seemed to ripple through the dining room. The soft laughter faded. The eyes of white couples, well-dressed businessmen, and impeccably coiffed blonde socialites drifted over her, lingering on her deep brown skin, her thick curls, on features that didn't conform to any of their preconceived notions of luxury. In a world where every detail was curated to signal status, Naomi stood out, and not everyone appreciated it. At the far end of the hall, Ashley Miller, the restaurant's head server, known for her pristine uniform, expertly pinned-up hair, and flawless appearance, finally registered Naomi's presence. She glanced up, eyes flicking over Naomi's hair, her skin, her simple attire. Ashley's lips pressed into a professional smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of coldness, a trace of unease. In Ashley's mind, a thought surfaced as instinctively as breath. People like her don't belong here. This place isn't for her kind. No one spoke these words aloud, but the atmosphere shifted beneath the crystalline glow. Under those sparkling lights, Naomi Carter, alone yet unbowed, silently made her way past the crowded tables, stepping into a night full of challenges without once lowering her head. Naomi took a few more steps, her breath steady as she moved through the sea of unfamiliar faces. She gently placed her hand on the host stand. With a soft yet clear voice that carried through the elegant space and the distant murmurs, she said, "I'd like to make a reservation for one, please." Ashley Miller looked Naomi over with a scrutinizing gaze, standing up straight as if to reaffirm the boundary between server and guest. She blinked slowly and forced a dry smile, deliberately extending the silence, creating an awkward pause that made Naomi wait longer than usual. Then, lifting her head with an air of arrogance, Ashley spoke, her voice betraying unmistakable sarcasm. "Are you sure you can afford to eat here? This is Crown Lumiere, not some fast food joint down the street." She drew out the last word icily, as if she wanted everyone nearby to hear. A group of young white patrons sitting near the host stand chuckled quietly under their breath. They glanced at Naomi, then at each other, their expressions mixing pity and curiosity, as though they were witnessing an unexpected bit of entertainment on an otherwise dull evening. Ashley's eyes scanned Naomi from head to toe, lingering longer on her simple shoes and small canvas bag. In her mind, a cascade of assumptions and prejudices formed, stories stitched together from the color of Naomi's skin, her understated attire, and her calm demeanor. Beneath her polite veneer, Ashley couldn't conceal her doubt and the deeper thought, a black woman dressed like that, she must be delusional. It wasn't merely a question about money. Ashley's words carried a subtle denial of Naomi's right to be here, to experience this place, to be treated with respect. Underneath lay the weight of generations who had been ushered out of upscale spaces simply because they didn't fit the standard that people like Ashley had set in their minds. Naomi recognized all of this in an instant, but she maintained her gaze and posture. She knew that the moment she bowed her head or offered even a timid smile, Ashley would have already won. Behind the stand, Ashley stood confidently, wielding power in her own small domain, a world where every look and every word were invisible stones, building a wall of discrimination that kept anyone different firmly outside. Under the brilliant lights, Crown Lumiere felt both icy and stifling, making each breath feel heavier for Naomi. Yet she remained standing, back straight and eyes unwavering, knowing full well that the real battle for a black woman in this place was only just beginning. The icy words had barely left Ashley's lips, lingering in the air like an invisible trap meant to force Naomi to back down. But when Ashley saw that Naomi remained calm, she looked momentarily unsettled. Swiftly regaining her composure, she turned to the computer before her fingers moving deliberately, as if exaggerating every keystroke. "What's your name?" Ashley asked, her tone flat and emotionless, though her eyes flickered with vigilance, as though expecting a name that didn't fit the standard of this restaurant. "Naomi Carter," Naomi replied, enunciating each syllable and lifting her head to meet Ashley's gaze. Ashley typed the name into the reservation system, her face attempting professionalism even as her lips tightened and her eyes shifted between Naomi and the screen. She let the silence stretch, creating an unnecessary pause. A few seconds passed before she shook her head, curled a smirk, and turned toward Naomi with a look half pitying, half contemptuous. "I don't see your name on the list. Our guests usually book at least a week in advance, especially guests like you." The words "guests like you" were drawn out with an unmistakable sneer. A quick glance around the host stand revealed the other servers, most of them white, exchanging knowing looks. Their silence spoke volumes. "I told you, she doesn't belong here." A little further away, a group of young patrons by the window raised their phones under the pretense of photographing their food, but were actually filming this exchange. They watched Naomi with a mix of curiosity and glee, as if they were witnessing a no-ticket required drama, the kind in which a black woman trying to break into their world was always destined to fail. Ashley placed both hands on the counter, waiting for Naomi's reaction. In that moment, every subtle gesture became a tool of unspoken rejection. The lingering headshake, the eye roll, even the crisp click of the keyboard in the hush. Each movement, each look, reinforced one message. Here, power belonged to those who knew how to set boundaries. Naomi felt the chill of their indifference, but kept her gaze steady. Standing tall, she quietly observed every reaction around her, knowing that her next steps would matter not just for herself but for everyone like her, those who had been rejected with a single word, a gesture, a glance. The area around the host stand remained eerily quiet, as if everyone was waiting for some explosive reaction to break the heavy tension. But Naomi simply shrugged, her calm eyes responding to each probing look around her. That composure made Ashley even more impatient, as though Naomi's silent resilience was a provocation she couldn't control. Reluctantly, Ashley pulled a menu from its stand, flipping through it perfunctorily, then gestured for Naomi to follow her. Her high heels clicked sharply on the marble floor, each deliberate step underscoring her authority and annoyance. Rather than leading Naomi down the crystal-lit main corridors, Ashley turned onto a side hallway that led to the back of the restaurant, an area with only a few small tables shoved against the wall, swallowed by shadows, and the stifling heat wafting from the kitchen entrance. There was no soft music here, nor the subdued laughter of upscale diners. Instead, all one heard were the clatter of dishes, bits of Spanish drifting out from the kitchen staff, and the lingering scent of cooking. Ashley stopped at a table pressed against the wall and quietly dropped the menu onto the tabletop with almost a harsh thud. She spoke up, her voice deliberately loud enough for the nearby white patrons to hear. "This table suits you better. If you need anything, just let me know, but please don't disturb the other guests." Her words pierced the already fragile atmosphere like a cold needle. A few diners at the adjacent table shot Naomi furtive glances before looking away. Some wrinkled their brows in discomfort. Others smirked with satisfaction, as if such discrimination were perfectly natural. Meanwhile, Ashley's face remained stone cold, arms crossed over her chest, waiting for Naomi to react with confusion or anger, responses she expected from someone she deemed different. But Naomi simply pulled out a chair and sat down, her gaze still composed. She raised her head, met Ashley's eyes, and offered a small, unfaltering smile. Not forced, not bitter. "Thank you." That simple reply was more than mere courtesy. It was an unspoken assertion of self-respect, a gentle reminder that even when shoved into a dark corner, she would keep her head held high. In that moment, Naomi understood clearly. To survive in this world, sometimes calmness is the strongest weapon against the invisible cuts of prejudice and hatred. In the distance, the golden lights still glinted off silk dresses and tailored suits. But in that small corner near the kitchen, a silent battle was beginning, between the power of prejudice and the steadfastness of human dignity. Naomi's hand smoothed the edge of the leather-bound menu, feeling the fine dust and the faint scent of specialty paper, trying to keep her mind calm amid the waves of hostile glances sweeping down her back. This little corner of Crown Lumiere felt cold, not just because it was next to the kitchen, but also because of the pitying looks, whispered comments, and the complicit silence that filled the air. Ashley didn't walk away like a regular server would. She stood straight, arms crossed over her chest, expecting Naomi to stumble over the elaborate French dish names or hesitate when asking about prices, giving her another excuse to mock. In Ashley's eyes shone a sick fascination, like a puppeteer relishing control over an unfair game. The hallway light didn't reach this nook. Only flickers of light and shadow danced on her crisp white uniform. After a moment of scanning the menu with concentrated focus, Naomi looked up and asked in a soft, confident tone, "Which dish is the signature here?" At that question, Ashley's lips curled into a tight, polite smile that carried just enough malice to be an insult. She tilted her head slightly and lowered her voice, blending it with the clatter of knives and cutting boards from the kitchen. "Are you familiar with the filet de Rossini? It's very well known, premium ingredients, extremely elaborate preparation, and it's not cheap. $350 per serving, just so you're not surprised when the bill comes. I only mention it because maybe in your neighborhood you don't encounter dishes like this." She drew out the last word slowly, as if delivering a light slap to Naomi's dignity. Her comment targeted not just Naomi's palate, but her background, social status, skin color, and very presence. In Ashley's mind, a black woman in simple attire like Naomi's belonged only in fast food joints or modest corner eateries, certainly not savvy enough to understand upscale French cuisine. By emphasizing your neighborhood, she viciously implied that all black people came from slums and did not deserve a place at Crown Lumiere. Ashley spoke loudly enough for the nearby white diners to hear. A group of young patrons, blonde, wearing corporate-style suits, turned to look at Naomi with excited, mocking expressions, as if they were watching a rare showpiece at an elegant dinner. A few of them giggled into their hands, unable to conceal their contempt. Across the room, other diners looked embarrassed and averted their eyes, afraid that if they intervened, the injustice might also touch them. They lowered their heads into their wine glasses, pretending not to see, not to hear, to protect their own sense of moral safety. Naomi felt that wave of scrutiny keenly. Each glance, each suppressed laugh felt like a pebble thrown at the pride she had honed over years. But she did not bow her head or respond with anger. Naomi met Ashley's eyes, her own gaze unwavering as it silently reflected back all the sneers and discrimination she knew so well. "I'll have the filet de Rossini," Naomi said, her words clear and concise, "and if possible, recommend a wine to go with it." Ashley froze for a second, her lips trembling with a mix of surprise and irritation before she swiftly climbed back onto her high horse. "Of course. I'll consult our wine expert for you, but I must remind you that we have a mandatory 20% gratuity policy. I'm sure you're aware." She deliberately stressed "you're aware," as if to underscore that even if Naomi could afford the meal, she would still be judged for her culture, habits, and ability to pay, things that were normal here, but implicitly assumed to be beyond someone like Naomi's reach. The air around Naomi grew thick. The diners nearby continued staring in her direction, the intersection of class and race laid bare. Amid all those looks, Naomi remained composed and merely nodded. "Thank you. Please bring that." When Ashley turned on her heel and walked away, Naomi knew that every cutting remark, every contemptuous glance, no matter how cold or cruel, could not strip away her self-respect. But she also understood the price of simply existing here, of daring to hold her head high. She would have to endure a torrent of prejudice and challenges that only those who have walked in the shadows could ever fully understand. The moment Ashley turned her back, Naomi held the menu in her hands a moment longer, feeling the paper tremble slightly beneath her fingertips. She knew that everyone around her, from the nearby diners to the passing servers, had just witnessed a subtle test with her at the center. Under the dim lights, the soft giggles, the fleeting glances, the whispered murmurs all felt like tiny needles prickling at anyone's pride who didn't belong in this world. But Naomi refused to back down. She gently set the menu on the table, kept her breathing slow, and directed her gaze toward Ashley, who was now looking back, waiting for a weak or angry reaction. Yet all she saw was Naomi's steady, polite smile. "I want to try that dish, and I'm sure I can afford it." Her words rang calm, not as a challenge, not as proof of anything. They were simply an affirmation of her right to choose, her right to exist, despite every invisible barrier erected by those looks and prejudices. Ashley rolled her eyes and offered a curt smile, striving to keep surprise off her face. She jabbed at her pen, recording the order in her book with a stiff hand, never taking her eyes off Naomi. Beneath that poised expression lay clear discomfort, even irritation, because this customer not only didn't know her place, she also dared to hold her dignity in the face of so many thinly veiled insults. A sigh escaped Ashley's lips, and then she leaned in a bit, lowering her voice, but still loud enough for others to hear. "I just want to avoid trouble. You know, sometimes guests don't grasp the true value of a place like this. The food's excellent, the service top-notch, but not everyone can truly appreciate it." Those words were a skillful denial, reminding Naomi that she was an outsider, while also emphasizing that only a select few, definitely not guests like you, were truly worthy of this place. Each syllable dripped with condescension, and the presumed superiority of someone who believed they were protecting the restaurant's standards as well as their own. Naomi didn't act offended. She looked up, her eyes steady, her lips holding a gentle yet unwavering smile. "Maybe today is the day I'll finally understand," she replied, her voice quiet but every word crisp and decisive. Ashley didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, closed her order book, and turned away. But before leaving, she made a point of speaking loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'll let the chef know. I hope the dish won't disappoint you." Those words were like a small barb, sinking deeper into the already tense air, prompting more stares toward Naomi, some with discomfort, some with glee, as if they were about to witness some odd spectacle. Naomi relaxed her shoulders and took a deep breath, letting the warmth inside her dispel the chill that Ashley's words and looks had sown. She had endured nights like this many times, shoved to the margins in upscale places, subjected to sarcastic remarks as light as a breeze but as painful as a blade. Yet for Naomi, patience and composure were her true strengths, a silent armor that prevented her from being conquered by the haughty faces around her. In the distance, a piano began to play, mingling with the clink of glasses, but in that kitchen corner, Naomi waited quietly, proud in her silence. Even though tonight had begun with prejudice and a challenge, she was determined. No matter how bitter the swallow, she would not let anyone take away her right to hold her head high. The air in that small corner grew heavier, even though jazz music and distant laughter still floated in from the main dining room. After taking Naomi's order, Ashley didn't return to her table right away, as would be customary at Crown Lumiere. Instead, she leisurely serviced the other tables, mostly well-dressed white guests speaking English laced with French, discussing million-dollar deals, overseas trips, or upscale theater shows. To them, the presence of a solitary black woman tucked away in the back was just an out-of-place streak of color, an odd question left unanswered. Ashley moved among those tables with a professional smile and friendly eyes, occasionally bending to straighten napkins or refill glasses with warm attentiveness, even leaning in to share a quiet joke. No one could see that behind that flawless service lay another mask, cold and calculating, reserved for the guests Ashley deemed unworthy. Meanwhile, Naomi's table was ignored. Her appetizer had been prepared in the kitchen long ago and was waiting on the pass, but Ashley deliberately avoided it, acting busy each time she passed by or averting her gaze in another direction. Once, Naomi caught a glimpse of Ashley's eyes in a fleeting moment. No pretense, only indifference tinged with contempt. It was no longer a silent arrogance, but a power play. Ashley wanted Naomi to understand that even the smallest things, extra wait time, averted glances, how a dish was placed on the table, were tools to show who was in control. A group of young patrons nearby had witnessed this from the start and whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads, others sneered. A pair of girlfriends held their phones under the table, secretly recording, faces a mix of amusement and embarrassment. The interplay of light and shadow, the furtive glances, they created a small stage where Naomi was placed under the microscope of every layer of prejudice. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes, Ashley brought the appetizer to Naomi's table, and she set the salad down with a heavy thud, the dressing splashing against the plate's rim, making a sharp clack that drew the attention of nearby diners. Ashley bowed her head slightly, but her lips curled into a sly smile as she offered a pointed comment. "I hope you know how to eat this. With a salad, you can use either a fork or a knife, but our regulars tend to have their own way of enjoying it. I trust you do too." To any other guest, those words would be a simple suggestion, but in this context, they were another jab, dug even deeper into Naomi's isolation. A reminder that she was an odd guest, an outsider not expected to understand a high-end dining culture. Naomi maintained her smile, betraying no hint of hurt. She looked at Ashley steadily and nodded politely. "Thank you. I'll do my best to enjoy it like I'm one of the regulars." Not everyone in the restaurant failed to notice the disparity in service. A few older patrons shot Ashley disapproving glances and spoke quietly to their companions. But then they turned away and immersed themselves in their own conversations, as if the injustice they had witnessed was either too insignificant to address or too familiar to provoke outrage. Ashley turned away, still exuding confidence and indifference, shoulders squared, every step asserting that she was the one setting the rules here. Yet deep in her eyes flickered a small unease, because despite being isolated, Naomi had not wilted, had not snapped, and had not reacted the way Ashley expected. Naomi picked up her fork and gently cut a piece of salad, bringing it to her lips, every movement slow and measured, as if she truly savored the taste and embraced the pace of a genuine customer. Inside her resided a quiet resolve, a steadfastness unwilling to surrender to even the smallest acts of discrimination. And in that moment, in the dim corner of the restaurant, Naomi Carter retained the poise of a free person, undeterred by the undercurrents of prejudice swirling around her. The clatter of Ashley's plate against the table still reverberated, a lingering echo drifting through the corners of Crown Lumiere. As Ashley turned away, the bitter aftertaste of her sarcastic remark hung in the air around Naomi's table, but now the atmosphere was no longer entirely indifferent as before. A group of fashionably dressed young patrons at the next table had been watching from the start. A sharp-eyed brunette leaned into her boyfriend and whispered, "I've never seen a server speak to a guest like that, especially in Beverly Hills." Her boyfriend nodded angrily, glancing first at Ashley, who was tending a white couple's table with completely opposite politeness, and then back at Naomi, shaking his head in disbelief. She had the nerve to openly demean a black woman here in Beverly Hills. I can't believe it. It wasn't just them. At a corner table across the room, two well-dressed, middle-aged women exchanged hushed words, their eyes flashing with outrage. One of them murmured, "If that were my daughter, I'd be on my feet demanding to see the manager." To have that kind of treatment in a place this upscale is utterly shameful. By the window, a young woman with striking features raised her phone to capture Ashley placing the dish and speaking rudely to Naomi. She leaned toward her friend and whispered, "This is pure racism. You have to keep filming. If this goes viral, everyone needs to see it." Her friend hesitated, a note of anxiety in her voice. "Do you think we should? Should we say something?" But the first girl shook her head firmly. "If we speak up now, it'll become a huge thing. Let's see how they handle it first." Older patrons appeared torn. Some simply sighed, their gazes flickering between Naomi, eyes full of both empathy and hesitation, and their own glasses of wine, as if they wanted to show solidarity but feared getting dragged into unwanted drama. They nursed their drinks and spoke in quieter tones, pretending not to see or hear. An epidemic of silence typical of those who have witnessed injustice too many times and lack the courage to intervene. The dining room's atmosphere began to fracture into two halves. On one side, indignant stares and hushed whispers. On the other, deliberate silence, heads turned away or absorbed in their meals, refusing to become part of the issue. Yet, whether fueled by outrage or apathy, all attention centered on Naomi, the solitary black woman, calmly cutting her salad, back straight, gaze unflinching, as if every jab of prejudice simply slipped off her invisible armor. Meanwhile, as Ashley returned to serve a regular table in the center of the restaurant, she cast a quick glance at Naomi. She noticed the unusual shift in so many eyes, the unexpected quiet in that corner. For a fleeting moment, Ashley's confidence wavered, but she instantly reclaimed her composure, as though she still believed she controlled the rules of the game. In the kitchen, a Latin server lowered his voice to a colleague. "Ashley's really bad today." His co-worker replied, "But that guest is tough. If it were me, I'd have walked out already." Yet, whether they were outraged, indifferent, or simply observing, no one could deny that a line had been torn between the polished image the restaurant projected and the reality unfolding within. Under Crown Lumiere's warm golden glow, racial prejudice stopped being a whispered secret and gradually became a topic openly discussed by witnesses. And at the eye of that storm, Naomi Carter sat tall, her silent resolve making every surrounding bias seem increasingly awkward, unsettled, and small. While hushed whispers and scrutinizing glances continued to drift around the dining room, an elderly figure rose slowly in the left corner. Mr. Richard Bennett, his hair silver, his face weathered but softened by kind blue eyes, was dressed in a tasteful navy suit. Silently, he set his napkin on the chair and made his way toward Naomi, his polished leather shoes making a steady, subdued sound against the marble floor. He paused at Naomi's table, offering a slight bow in the manner of a true Southern gentleman. In his eyes shone an unguarded empathy, a genuine spark of humanity amid the tense, divided atmosphere. He leaned in and spoke quietly, loud enough for Naomi and the nearby diners to hear, but without causing a scene. "Child, don't let small-minded prejudices hurt you. Your patience is your greatest strength. People like you are needed here, not unwanted." Naomi looked surprised for a moment. Her expression softened as if the chill that had filled the room was eased by this gentle breeze of kindness. She smiled and nodded, thankful. To her, sometimes a single sincere word in the right moment could warm an entire night spent battling waves of bias. That small comfort, however, lasted only an instant. Ashley's imposing figure appeared again, walking with purposeful steps and a face that barely concealed both coldness and irritation. Her gaze flicked to Richard and then to Naomi, as if staking her claim on the power dynamics of the room. She stopped beside Mr. Bennett, her tone firm but just polite enough for the restaurant setting. "Sir, could you please return to your table? I can handle things here." That statement was more than a simple reminder to a guest. It was a declaration of war on anyone daring to interfere with the order Ashley had established. The already charged atmosphere tightened further. Diners nearby watched closely, some casting admiring looks at Richard, others shrinking back, fearful that if they rose to speak, trouble would follow. Richard met Naomi's eyes one more time, his own shining with both indignation and regret. He gently placed a hand on the back of her chair and said softly, for only her to hear, "If you need me, I will always stand with you." He stepped back, straightened his posture, and walked away, his footsteps deliberate yet unwavering, leaving behind an unusual silence, as though the entire restaurant had just witnessed a silent struggle between compassion and prejudice. Ashley stood tall, shoulders squared, a petty look of triumph on her face. She adjusted the menu on Naomi's table, glanced briefly at the diners who had just seen the exchange, and resumed her frosty, professional demeanor. Yet, deep in her eyes, despite all her smugness, was a flicker of unease. Even the smallest act of kindness could become the first crack in the wall of bias she had labored to erect. Naomi exhaled slowly, her lips still holding that gentle smile, but inside, the power of that kindness burned like a small fire amid a sea of ice. In another hidden corner of Crown Lumiere, between shadow and light, there remained a sliver of space for goodness. however small, that was enough to give someone the strength not to give up, even on the hardest night. The tension that had briefly eased after Richard Bennett returned to his table was shattered once more by Ashley's actions, making the room feel as though it had been struck by a tremor. Unwilling to accept that her authority had been challenged by an elderly guest, and refusing to be bested by Naomi's calmness, she resolved to push the situation to the absolute limit of endurance. Ashley stopped in the middle of the aisle, directly in front of Naomi's table, just as a group of fellow servers happened to be passing. As if to demonstrate that she alone determined the standards, she suddenly spoke loudly and without regard for the minimal civility expected in an upscale environment. "Is anyone allowed to come into Crown Lumiere now? Just throw on any old clothes, ignore social class or skin color? What kind of prestige is that?" She raised her voice on the last word, deliberately making sure everyone in the dining room could hear. The silence ripped through the room in an instant. Glasses paused mid-air, knives and forks stopped mid-motion, and conversations abruptly dropped. Some diners turned to stare at Ashley, their expressions stunned. Others glanced at Naomi, then at one another, unsure whether to feel anger, sympathy, or fear of being drawn into conflict. A group of young patrons near the window, who had been watching since the beginning, exclaimed indignantly, "What did she just say? Did anyone else hear that right? That's outright racism." A well-dressed, middle-aged couple exchanged worried looks. "Can you believe this is happening even in Beverly Hills?" Meanwhile, Ashley stood tall, her face a frozen mask of triumph. She surveyed the passing servers as though seeking their approval or applause. Yet a few averted their eyes and continued on as if busy. Others looked at her, then at Naomi, their hesitation palpable. Only one male server spoke up quietly, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. "Ashley, cut it out. Stop making such a scene." But Ashley pressed on, as though nothing could stop her from protecting her sense of control over the atmosphere. She strode over to Naomi's table, placed a hand on the back of the chair, and leaned in until her face was inches from Naomi's. Her voice dropped to a sharp whisper. "Are you sure you still want to have dinner here? Not everyone likes their evening ruined by an inappropriate presence." For the second time, her words were no longer subtle. They became a public insult delivered in front of dozens of people, shattering the unspoken rules of Beverly Hills etiquette. This instant triggered a chorus of whispers and murmurs throughout the room. Some nearby diners pulled out their phones to record. Others exchanged hushed words. "This is outrageous. We have to call the manager." All eyes in the restaurant now centered on Naomi Carter. Amid that heavy silence, her eyes shone not with anger, but with a mixture of sorrow and pride. She understood that no matter how she responded, she could become the evening's focal point, the blemish on this luminous setting. Yet Naomi chose to remain silent, upholding her quiet dignity and allowing Ashley's words, and the layers of prejudice they represented, to be fully exposed before the public. In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. Every gaze was fixed on Naomi Carter, and in that intense stillness, the seeds of resistance began to sprout, a subtle but growing undercurrent of empathy and outrage, poised to rise up and crack the glittering facade of Crown Lumiere. Ashley's final words were the fuse that ignited the entire room. Within seconds, Crown Lumiere ceased to be the serene dining space of the elite and instantly became the epicenter of outrage, indignation, and an openly defiant wave. A young woman at the table near the window, the same one who had been silently recording earlier, suddenly started a live stream on social media. Her face radiated anger, her eyes shining with righteous indignation as she swept her phone across the unfolding scene, "Everyone, look at this. Racism right here in Beverly Hills. A black woman is being treated this way simply because she doesn't fit their image. Share this so the world can see what Crown Lumiere is really like." The whispers and murmurs turned into outright protest. Several white diners who had been silent out of discomfort could no longer bear it. A well-dressed, middle-aged man stood up in the center of the room, pointing directly at Ashley. "I demand to see the manager immediately. This is not America in the 60s. We will not tolerate open racial discrimination in this day and age." Other patrons joined in. Many tables simultaneously raised their hands, beckoning a server. A few people pulled out their phones to record every moment, capturing Ashley's words, the indifferent looks, and the growing anger in the room. The chime of incoming live stream notifications and the buzz of phones ringing cut through the furious shouts. An older woman with her silver hair neatly coiled up spoke to her husband, her voice trembling but resolute. "We have to speak up. If we don't stand up for her now, tomorrow it will be someone else receiving that treatment." The atmosphere, once defined by elegance and politeness, shattered into fragments of open rebellion. Voices grew louder and bolder. "Why do you think you have the right to judge someone just because they are different? Where's the manager? Why hasn't anyone appeared yet?" Meanwhile, fellow servers looked on in awkwardness, some shaking their heads, others embarrassed and eager to avoid the spotlight. A young server, face pale with worry, whispered to a coworker, "This is going to be all over the news. Ashley has really gone too far." Caught in the surge of public outcry, Ashley's confidence wavered for the first time that evening. Her face drained of color as she realized cameras and phones were pointed at her. Yet resentment drove her to maintain a haughty posture, forcing herself to stand tall against the crowd's pressure, even as she grew smaller and more isolated amid their fury. At the far end of the room, Naomi sat straight-backed, her eyes bright not with glee, but with a mixture of surprise and emotion. She had never imagined that her quiet resistance could touch people's hearts, that from standing alone against injustice, she would now find herself embraced by a burgeoning community, people courageous enough to speak up for fairness. Calls for the manager grew more urgent. A staff member hurried off to report it, and the office door at the end of the hallway swung open, signaling that an even more intense upheaval was about to follow. On the live streamer's phone screen, view and share counts skyrocketed by the second. What had seemed like a small incident within the four walls of Crown Lumiere erupted outward into the broader community. This was no longer just the struggle of one black woman facing discrimination. It had become a warning bell for every falsely refined space, showing that once justice is awakened, it can surge forward as an unstoppable wave. The calls for a manager grew increasingly urgent, the Davlini of public opinion crashing against the once imposing walls of Crown Lumiere. The back office door behind the bar swung open, and all eyes shifted to the man who emerged. Restaurant manager David Walker, tall and broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, clad in a navy suit without a wrinkle. He strode swiftly into the eye of the storm, his expression solemn as his gaze swept the room, acknowledging each smartphone recording the scene, each furrowed brow of offended diners. But when his eyes settled on the dim corner where Naomi Carter sat calmly, he paused for a heartbeat, surprise flickering across his face before it transformed into unwavering respect. The air seemed to freeze as he made his way directly to Naomi's table, offering a slight bow with the warm timbre of his voice, entirely the opposite of how Ashley had treated her from the start. "Miss Carter, my sincere apologies. We were unaware you were dining here today. How may I assist you? We deeply regret that your experience fell short of the Crown Lumiere standard." The entire dining room fell silent in astonishment. No one had expected that the plain-spoken black woman tucked away near the kitchen would receive such deference from the highest-ranking manager. The atmosphere scrambled to shift. Whispers erupted. This time, not in mockery or pity, but in sheer wonder. "Wait, Miss Carter. Who is she that the manager himself is apologizing to her like that? Is she the owner of the restaurant?" Ashley froze in place, her hand clenching into a fist, her face drained of color as though her soul had been wrenched away. She took a step backward, the confidence and superiority she'd displayed moments ago vanishing, replaced by sheer panic. Her lips trembled as she scanned the room, as if hoping this was all a bad dream, but the reality was unfolding clearly before her. Manager David turned to Ashley, his eyes steely and severe, an intensity that made the other staff straighten involuntarily and avoid his gaze. He lowered his voice, each word heavy with disappointment yet calm. "Ashley, report to my office immediately after your shift. I will personally address every complaint about your service tonight. For now, step away from Miss Carter's table. I will be serving her myself." The dining room was utterly hushed, every gaze shifting from outrage to disbelief and then to unspoken admiration for the woman who had endured trial after trial, and now was being vindicated in the grandest fashion. Those diners who had clamored for justice suddenly realized Naomi Carter's true stature. One man murmured, "I knew it. She's clearly not ordinary. She's the owner. If this goes online, no one will dare judge anyone by appearances again." Naomi met Manager David's eyes, a gentle but proud gratitude shining within them. She nodded. "Thank you. I only want every guest at Crown Lumiere to receive the same respect." A thin smile danced across David Walker's lips, equal parts pride and modest embarrassment at the prior mishap. He inclined his head once more before Naomi, a rare gesture in a place long governed by unwritten hierarchies. Ashley, by contrast, could only quietly retreat, her steps hurried and trembling, her face haunted amid the swirling tide of public condemnation. The wall of power and blind confidence she had erected collapsed in an instant before an undeniable truth. Real authority does not reside in one's skin color, attire, or designer uniform, but in the character and dignity of each human being. The aftershocks of astonishment still lingered in the dining room when Naomi lifted her head, her eyes steady and composed. At the center of a storm of expectant gazes, she chose not to seize the moment for personal power or revenge. Instead, she spoke in a gentle yet firm voice. "I don't seek special privileges, nor do I want any favors. What I want is simply to address how guests, especially guests of color and those from humble backgrounds, are treated. True class in a restaurant comes from fairness and respect, not crystal chandeliers or high menu prices." Her words cut through the thick air of shame and tension. Every table fell silent, not only out of embarrassment for Ashley, but also because everyone sensed the depth and sincerity of someone who had endured countless moments of being underestimated and tested, yet still maintained her self-respect and dignity. David Walker looked at Naomi, his face softening in understanding of that pain, the kind no amount of glamorous lighting could erase. Without hesitation, he turned to Ashley, his tone calm but stern. "Ashley, please leave this area immediately and report to me after your shift to explain your service behavior in full detail. From now on, I will personally attend to Miss Carter." Ashley stood there, her lips trembling with rage, her eyes red and unwilling to meet Naomi's gaze. Whispers began to spread from other tables, openly expressing disapproval, an unspoken consensus that Ashley's arrogance, stubbornness, and prejudice had crossed the final line. She tried to salvage whatever dignity she had left, raising her head and turning away, but each step seemed weighed down by the collapse of all her illusions of power and status. Ashley's figure disappeared behind the staff hallway door, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with shame and internal conflict among many diners. The manager personally poured water and checked Naomi's table before speaking softly. "On behalf of the entire restaurant, I extend our deepest apologies. What happened tonight is a lesson for all of us, and I promise that no one at Crown Lumiere will ever have to endure anything like this again." The gazes around the dining room slowly lowered, not just from emotion but from recognizing that, for the first time, an outsider had become the catalyst for changing the collective mindset. Many guests nodded quietly. Some avoided Naomi's eyes, embarrassed, while others looked at her with respect, as if they too had just been awakened. Naomi herself remained humble and gracious as everything reached its climax. She showed no sign of triumph or intent to set anyone straight. Instead, she said gently, "Thank you for listening. Sometimes a single reminder can transform an entire community and a way of life." In that moment, there was a collective pause, a resonant chord in each heart. Crown Lumiere, once a proud upscale restaurant, had become the site of its most unforgettable lesson about kindness, the courage to speak up, and the power of humility. The atmosphere in the restaurant remained heavy with echoes of the confrontation even after Naomi's dinner ended. But every gaze and every thought in Crown Lumiere had changed, no longer scrutinizing her, but filled with respect and quiet reflection. Before she left, Naomi gently turned to David Walker and said, "If possible, I would like to meet with the entire staff of Crown Lumiere. I believe tonight's events need to be addressed, not to blame anyone, but so that we can all learn something." Her request was received with complete solemnity. Less than 10 minutes later, every employee, from servers and chefs to receptionists and security, gathered in the large meeting room at the back of the restaurant. Worry, curiosity, embarrassment, and anticipation shone in their eyes. Ashley stood silently in a corner, her eyes red and her face still wet from tears. Naomi stepped forward, needing neither podium nor notes, only her calm gaze and a warm but unwavering voice. "We live in the 21st century, where differences in skin color, background, or social standing should never be reasons for anyone to be insulted, excluded, or looked down upon. Perhaps what happened tonight is not the first time at Crown Lumiere, and I'm sure there are many other Naimis who have silently walked away from places like this. But do you know why I decided not to stay silent anymore?" She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room, from the young servers in their crisp white uniforms to the chefs with still-scented aprons, all the way to David Walker's contemplative face. "I have been underestimated, turned away, and humiliated, simply because I am a black woman. That is something I cannot change, but what I can choose is how I respond. And today, I am not here to condemn anyone. I want you to understand that kindness, respect, and openness to difference are what make this a truly first-class restaurant. Not the crystal goblets, the French menu, or the golden glow of the chandeliers." Naomi turned her gaze directly to Ashley. In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Ashley could neither maintain her arrogance nor hide behind her cool exterior. She broke down in tears, her face awash with guilt and shame. Naomi spoke gently, every word firm yet free of rancor. "Ashley, I believe you, and I believe each one of you here can change. No one is born carrying hatred or prejudice. But if you do not look within yourselves, Do not admit mistakes and make amends, then all the fame and wealth in this place will mean nothing. She turned to address everyone, her voice measured and resolute. When you put on the Crown Lumiere uniform, it carries the responsibility of upholding dignity and respect for both our guests and for ourselves. Do not let anyone leave with an invisible wound just because you think they are not suitable. Be the first to break down those barriers with genuine kindness, fairness, and compassion. A silence settled over the room, not one of fear, but of understanding, as the spark of willingness to change ignited within each person. Some eyes glistened with tears, some hearts breathed easier, and many nodded in quiet admiration. David Walker stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Naomi's shoulder, his voice soft yet firm. Thank you, not only for this lesson for Crown Lumiere, but for every person here. At the back of the room, Ashley wiped away her tears and looked up at Naomi with gratitude, remorse, and a newfound determination to truly change. In that space, every mask and invisible barrier was lifted, making way for a new spirit, one where every individual, regardless of skin color or background, could be heard, respected, and given the chance to become the best version of themselves. The back door closed softly behind her as Naomi left Crown Lumiere, stepping into the crisp Beverly Hills night. The chandelier lights from the grand lobby cast flickering reflections across the marble steps, stretching her silhouette into a long, solitary, yet proud shape. Outside, cars glided by quietly, but in Naomi's heart the warm echoes of the evening still resonated. Each step Naomi took along that famed boulevard was not merely her exit from a fancy restaurant, but the closing of a long night of prejudice, and the beginning of a quiet ripple of awakening that trailed behind her. Inside Crown Lumiere, once the door clicked shut, staff members sat in contemplation, their eyes meeting one another for the first time with empathy and solidarity rather than suspicion or judgment, a silent promise that no one would ever be left out or on the outside just because they were different. Now, in her changed uniform, Ashley sat pensive in the corner of the staff locker room. The last of her tears had dried, replaced by a quiet resolve. Deep down, she felt a painful but necessary acknowledgement. Real power didn't lie in controlling or imposing on others, but in choosing kindness, owning one's mistakes, facing the wounds you may have caused, and having the courage to help heal them with your own hands. David Walker, the longtime manager, moved from table to table earlier that evening, quietly thanking every guest who had spoken up, who had refused to stay silent. He understood that a restaurant's reputation isn't just built on the number of glowing online reviews, but on the willingness to confront and change one's deepest wrongs. Beyond the restaurant's doors, guests who had earlier been too shy or worried about causing trouble were now texting Naomi apologies, emailing to thank her for teaching them the courage to stand up for what's right, whether through a gaze, a few words, or the click of a share button on social media. On phone screens around the city, the clip of the incident at Crown Lumiere was spreading like wildfire, racking up thousands of comments and hundreds of thousands of views. Yet, behind all the anger, debate, and outrage was a question echoing in everyone's mind. If that had been me, what would I have done? Do I have the guts to speak up? And somewhere out there, other Naomis found new confidence, knowing they weren't alone, that even a small act of courage could shed light on an entire community tired of invisible walls built by prejudice. On that wide boulevard, Naomi paused for a moment. She turned and watched the Crown Lumiere lights recede into the distance. In her heart, she no longer felt like a victim of injustice, but a sower of change. Behind her stood not just a restaurant that had transformed, but a rising tide of awareness about justice, kindness, and the true worth of a community. A simple yet powerful lesson had been planted in hundreds of hearts, from guests and staff to strangers who merely passed by the story on their screens. Difference isn't an excuse for exclusion. It's a chance for each of us to choose compassion, equality, and strength. And one final message shone through the darkness like a beacon, not only for Crown Lumiere, but for anyone who's ever felt vulnerable in life. In a world where anyone can be anyone, choose to be kind. What do you think about tonight's events at Crown Lumiere? If you'd been there, how would you have reacted when faced with discrimination and injustice? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Each perspective, each experience is a seed for change. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit like, share it with friends so they can reflect, and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming videos about compassion, the power of courage, and everyday fairness. Thank you for being here. See you next time for more meaningful stories.